Wednesday, June 17th. Welcome back to SamCentre. I'm your host, as always, Sam. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, out of your week to be here with me. We have kind of a lull in the sports world if you're not into soccer, if you're not into baseball, right? We're in the dog days of summer, and that's all right because SamCentre's got you covered. We will start with our weekly check-in. Then we're going to move on to talk the hydration break. We're going to talk Murica, all things Freedom 250. There's a few controversial subjects that we need to talk about. And then CFL Wednesdays. This is our Wednesday show where we talk all things CFL. We're going to break down the week 3 matchups, 4 incredible games. One that I will be attending live, as always. Super excited to break it down. Let's get into the show. All right, we're going to have a midweek check-in here. A lot going on, as we talked about in the previous episode, with the Stanley Cup and the NBA Finals both wrapping up on the weekend, as well as the UFC having their Freedom 250 White House card. We had a lot happening, and now we're in what we call the dog days of summer. If you don't like to watch baseball daily, if you're not a massive fan of some of the other leagues like the CFL, the UFC, MLB, it's kind of a tough time for you. Obviously, World Cup is something that everybody around the world, maybe a little less in North America, but certainly Mexico, multiple places in Canada and the United States have been going crazy for these games. The host nations are all going to be back in action later this week, whereas finally we get to see some of the teams play who hadn't played. You know, it's a very interesting schedule that the World Cup has, where some of these teams like Canada played a while ago now, last week, where England is now just playing their game Wednesday, June 17th, as I'm recording this, Tuesday, June 16th, to get all of these episodes out in a perfect timing for you guys to watch to start your day or whatever time you choose to tune in. Dehydration breaks in FIFA has been a massive subject that we need to talk about. So far, not impressed with what I've seen out of the FIFA broadcast, but I'm on the fence here. I think you need to realize that these are athletes playing at a pace and at a level in the heat, in broad daylight, that in certain cases, I think hydration breaks are warranted. You know, this was implemented for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, which is obviously a much hotter climate. But when you talk Mexico City, it may not be that hot most of the time, but you are at extreme elevation. When you talk different places in the United States, there could be elements of humidity. I'm not sure you need a hydration break in Vancouver or Toronto. However, this is ad revenue for FIFA and they know it. You don't have to watch broadcasts that show ads, and you can certainly voice your displeasure online, but these hydration breaks are being used once per half, especially in the first half, to kind of break up the flow of the game a little bit, give the players and the referees a chance to rehydrate. And the big controversy surrounding that is that FIFA is essentially putting commercials into soccer. And you know, you do feel for these athletes because you watch them be running around the entire time. And you think, you know, stopping for water is probably a good idea. And the Telemundo broadcast, the Mexican broadcast, and other broadcast stations are not cutting to commercials during this time. So personally, I'm on the fence for this. Soccer, who really cares? Obviously, most of the world does. Personally, not something I care too much about. I'll be supporting Canada when they're back in action and taking on a lot of the big matches because it's still a spectacle. They're packing the arenas. Mexico is winning the World Cup, baby. We will see it. Viva Mexico. If not Canada. Obviously the favorites are still France, Spain, and a few other nations over there. But we will see. All right, moving on with the show, we are going to talk Murica and why there is controversy surrounding the Freedom 250 White House card. I came on the show Monday and I said to you all, best MMA show I've ever seen in my life. 7 fights, 7 knockouts. The first time in history that all the fights ended in KO, obviously with 7 fights only taking place instead of the standard 11 to 13. It makes it much easier for a record like that to be broken, but it does not take away from the fact that we had an amazing night of action. However, some controversy surrounds the event in a few different ways. We'll start with the first segment in Murica. According to the FBI Director Kash Patel, multiple assassination or terrorist attempts were thwarted by the American government and not allowed to happen. Obviously, we have to take a lot of this with a grain of salt. There could be a little bit of a propaganda machine happening in here. It is America, baby. But what I'll say is I definitely believe it. It's an area where you had a lot of important people. Trump's 80th birthday, everybody's gathered in the same place, 85,000 spectators. And so they did apprehend multiple suspects from different states who had intent to harm. Again, we don't know exactly what that means. Maybe somebody brought a gun around and they thought that's okay because it's in the States. Whatever the rules are, we're not going to get the details of each case. However, security went off without a hitch, weather went off without a hitch, and I think it was a great celebration for the nation of America and something where people can be united around the fact that it wasn't made to be political. It was Donald Trump's 80th birthday, but really the celebration was not about him. They celebrated veterans, they celebrated the nation of America and the 250th birthday of their country. Beautiful celebration, and nobody got shot in the ear. Success, if you ask me. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the controversy that now surrounds the fighters, specifically in the co-main event and the main event. And let's start in the co-main event, where we talked about our boy Alex Pereira losing to the Dirty Frenchman. And I came on here so pumped up after watching the fights on Sunday night. I needed to get an episode out, edit, record it. And so now taking a few days to look at what's been happening online, some of the talk around the fight, some of the messages that have come out from the fighters themselves. I think Alex Pereira, he's talking a lot about taking strikes to the back of the head. And there is a clear point where Ciryl Gane hit Alex Pereira with multiple hammer fists and elbows to the back of the head. Clearly behind the ear, clearly with no intent to hurt in the moment, but intent to do damage, right? Ciryl Gane, it was said by Alex Pereira after the fight that he got so excited and he was looking to finish that by whatever means possible. That included multiple strikes that did look to be quite illegal. However, and here's what we're going to talk about because I love you, Potan, but you did get dropped by a jab. You did not get dropped by any strike that was dirty. And so watching that fight again, he was rocked very significantly by a very clean counter slip strike by Gane. And I think that was always going to be the danger of the fight. You were going to see the faster, more athletic, and true heavyweight taking on the big guy with the big bum who took on the weight in the wrong way, right? And that's exactly what we saw. So he got hurt with the counter right hand. And then as he was on the ground, he shot for the legs. And it did look like Alex was maybe going to get somewhat of a takedown or control and maybe get his bearings about him. And that's when the hammer started coming. Multiple shots to the back of the head and multiple shots that also were on the ear and maybe in that area where it's tough. And so more and more is coming out after the fight where Pereira's team almost never makes excuses. They lost to Israel Adesanya. They didn't make excuses. They lost to Ankalaev and also didn't make excuses. But in this case, it really does feel like maybe they are making some excuses. You don't want to come too hard or come down too hard on a champion that is really fought for your money. He's fought to entertain us all. If he says something affected him, I think you do have to believe him. But also, it's not a great look. You did lose and you did get dropped by a very clean shot and he didn't eye poke you and he didn't nut shot you. None of that happened, right? But what did happen was strikes to the back of the head, which without a doubt did affect Alex's ability to recover after that devastating shot. If Ciryl needs to focus on where his shots are landing, he probably can't land 15 uninterrupted shots because he's just firing at the back of the head. And this is on Herb Dean. Herb Dean needs to realize in that moment, and obviously it's incredibly difficult. I've never refereed an MMA fight and I probably never will do it in my life. I've done baseball, basketball, volleyball, multiple other sports, hockey, but never anything combat sports related. So I cannot speak to how difficult Herb Dean's job is. Somebody who's been around the sport for multiple years, has refereed on multiple promotions. He is a guy who knows the rules. But in that moment, I think Herb is getting caught up in the gravity of the situation. It's a potential shifting of the heavyweight division. You're seeing one of the greatest combat sports artists of all time take significant damage and be hit in a way that we haven't seen since he fought Israel Adesanya way down at 185 pounds. And so Herb needs to really see what's happening. It's the same thing that happened in the Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira rematch a few years ago, about a year ago. Chandler had his one opportunity and just hammered a bunch of shots down on Charles's spine before the ref did anything to step in. I'm screaming at my TV that cannot happen, but even if you take 7 or 8 of those in rapid succession before the referee stops it, that's as bad as an eye poke. It's as bad as a nut shot, right? These are things that affect a fighter, and they affect his equilibrium, and now Alex cannot recover. He cannot shoot for that single leg. And so again, I'm not entirely sure if these are excuses being made by Pereira. I want to say they're not. I really do. But the man was just hit very violently. And I don't know, it's the same thing with the Yuri Prohaska, a Carlos Ulberg fight afterwards where Yuri was saying all these things, but you're probably still concussed, my friend. So why don't you take a couple weeks, come back, reassess the situation, file a complaint with the commission if you believe that it should be a no contest instead of a finish, and let the bodies do their work officially. Doing it this way just opens up doors for people to make fun of you, for people to call you a quitter, for people to say whatever they want to say. And that is not the reputation that Poatan deserves. The man is a champion, man who will go out there, fight for your money. It's just unfortunate controversy surrounding the event. And it's the same thing in the main event, unfortunately. And in no way are we talking about illegal strikes. Obviously, there is some talk that in the very first round, Justin Gaethje's thumb glanced off of the cheek of Ilia Topuria and maybe got him in the eye a little bit, causing a cut and potentially some of that damage on his one eye. I will say this, and I think everybody's in agreement on this one. Justin beat the crap out of Ilia. That's not what caused the fight to be the way it was. Ilia actually looked incredibly impressive in rounds 1 and 2 and ripped multiple shots to Justin's face. As we spoke about on Monday, the problem was Ilia just decided he didn't want to respect the power coming back from Justin. And when he did, it was already too late. You had taken over 8 shots from a power puncher at 155 pounds who is fresh. And so now, Justin Gaethje, you are the champion of the world. Where the controversy comes into play, and something I'm not seeing many people talk about, I believe Ilia Topuria quit on the stool. And again, I'm going to preface this by saying we did not need to see Ilia go out there and lose his eyeball. We did not need to see something happen where this man risks his future health or his face, anything like that. He's a very handsome man. But we don't need to see him risk any of that kind of stuff. What he said at the end of round 3, though, if you've been an MMA fan for a long time, this is the truth. Ilia said to his corner, "I cannot see." And again, he might have been telling the truth. And so when we got to the corner at the end of round 3, the doctors came over. Everybody was ready to stop the fight. Because as you know, as a fighter, every fighter knows this. Ilia's been in multiple cage matches. His brother's been in cage matches. They are a combat family. They know what this means. If I know what it means, Ilia knows what it means. That means, "Doc, I'm done." Without quitting, Ilia's telling his corner, "I am done. I cannot see. If you can't see, legally, we are not going to keep that fight going." So Ilia, if you truly couldn't see, how did you go out there and win round 4? You could see, okay? I get it, and I get what he was saying. He was saying, my eyes, blood everywhere, it's swelling. I'm sure he couldn't see great. It's the same thing with Cejudo against Song. We've seen eye pokes in multiple other fights. They affect things. Tom Aspinall is still recovering from his eye poke from that dirty Frenchman. But what we'll say is this, Topuria, when that fight happened, you were telling your stool you wanted to quit. And then the referee came over, and this man has pride. He's not going to say to the referee, "I want to quit," because that's when the microphone and the action is on him. So that is actually showing weakness in the cage. And these men are warriors. They go out there and they fight for our money and our entertainment every week. He will not do that. But he wanted that fight to be done in round 3. And so the interesting part about all of this is Ilia was almost forced to go back out there in round 4, and he was forced to fight, and he actually probably won the round. And so now his corner, realizing their mistake, his brother and his dad came to their senses midway through that round, or maybe even right at the beginning, and they said in their head, "No, he wanted to quit. We messed up. We didn't listen to him." That's exactly what happened. So no matter what the performance looked like in round 4, that fight was going to end because his corner realized what Ilia had said previously. Ilia could see. He could. Because you don't go in there against Justin Gaethje for 5 entire minutes, survive, and honestly end up on top and winning the round if you cannot see out of your eyeballs. Right? Justin will take your head off like he had been doing for the previous 3 rounds. So he could see, And he probably could have gone round 5. Now, what I'm saying is this is unnecessary because damage being taken and all of that can really risk a man's life, can really risk everything about it, and it's unsafe. We didn't need to see it. But if we saw round 4, we could have seen round 5 because Ilya had a good round 4. His corner, being his dad and being his brother, that is something that is the difference between a Trevor Whitman. When we talked about the coaches and all the controversy going on about who's better, I don't know. But one thing I do know is this. Trevor Whitman will let Justin Gaethje go out on his stool and he will let him die in the cage. For better or for worse, Whitman will never say to Gaethje, we're just going to protect you in this one, unless it's egregious. That fight against Max, he was getting pieced up for 4 straight rounds and they still went out there for the 5th. And he didn't look great going into the 5th, and he got knocked out with 1 second remaining. UFC 300. Go check out that fight if you don't remember. But Ilya's brother and dad saw something different. Whereas Trevor Whitman sees a champion and a warrior in front of him, Ilya's brother, Alexandre, sees his younger brother. His dad sees his son getting the absolute tar beaten out of him and seeing his son come to his senses that he wasn't going to win the fight, even if the fight was close. And so the difference between having family in your corner and having somebody like a coach in Trevor Whitman is simply this. Round 5 happens if Justin Gaethje is in the opposite position, whereas round 5 does not happen with Ilia Topuria in his corner. That's where the controversy exists. I personally do not feel like that is quitting. However, that's what we call it in this sport. We're very harsh on athletes. He went to his stool. He said he was done. We're going to say it was a quit. At the end of the day, my honest opinion is we don't need to see a man blinded in the cage when he still has multiple years of good fights remaining. He can be a champion again. So Ilia Topuria, I think you need to go back and be humbled from this opportunity because you really did throw in the towel at the end of round 3. I saw you, my friend. Official finish, end of round 4 for Justin Gaethje. That is our controversy. Let's get into our CFL Wednesday show. I'm super excited. Let's break down the week 3 action that is to come. All right, fellas, let's talk week 3 CFL. You know how passionate I am about this league. You know how passionate I am about my Edmonton Elks. We are in action taking on the Montreal Alouettes on Saturday, but we are going to start the week by talking about the BC Lions and the Hamilton Tiger Cats, a game that I think has incredible potential to be game of the week. I'm a massive fan of both organizations and both quarterbacks specifically. Nathan Rourke and Bo Levi Mitchell are going to show you high-level quarterback action in this game. You are going to see a team in Hamilton with weapons all over the field. A team that can sling the rock and a guy in Bo Levi Mitchell who has been doing this for years. His longevity is incredible. He's had major injury. He's come back from that, and he's really shown that over the years, a guy can get a lot smarter in his processing speed, his processing time, keep his arm talent, keep his arm strength, and he is now an unstoppable weapon for the Hamilton Ticats. He's going to be in contention for the MVP, for the most valuable offensive player every single year. Hamilton has weapons all over the field. They have multiple wide receivers who can sling it, who can absolutely catch anything that Bo Levi Mitchell slings to them. They can go deep. They can run these short to intermediate routes as well. And they now have a run game that looks like it can be established in these games. And that's what we talked about Hamilton was missing last year. Being able to rely on that run and defense game at the end in that third quarter, in that fourth quarter. That's going to be the difference in these games because a team like BC showed that against Saskatchewan, a team that can control the pace, go out there and score late, they did lose, right? So Hamilton has a path to victory here. Keep it close and then go out there, win it with your offense on a late drive, win it with your defense with a late stop at home in front of your home fans. A couple of my loyal subscribers are big Ticats fans. I hope you win this game, my friends. But the BC Lions are a very tough test for your team. The BC Lions went out there and lost their opening game to the Saskatchewan Roughriders on the road, and now they need to go week 2 on the road as well. And a big reason for this simply is because the World Cup is happening with Vancouver being one of the host cities. That's taking up the BC Lions Stadium. So they're going to start on the road. They're going to play a few home games in other stadiums that aren't normal to them. And I think BC, you're going to have to win some of these games because if you start slow, some of these other teams in the West might not, and you don't know if you'll be behind. You're a team with real Grey Cup aspirations. You're a team with the MVP of the league, a guy in Nathan Rourke who we've talked about being one of the most exciting quarterbacks that we have, a guy who is the MVP, a guy who is the most valuable Canadian time after time, and he represents our game extremely well. I think he needs to calm down and he needs to just do what makes him successful. He can extend plays with his legs. He can really show creativity in the pocket. And against a Hamilton team, he might have opportunities to do that. You know, they did struggle to defend Davis Alexander, and I think it could be similar result here against the BC Lions in Nathan Rourke. These athletic quarterbacks who can create mismatches, they can roll out of the pocket and they can find their one-on-one receivers. BC also has an excellent ground game and a defense that we thought would be quite prolific this year. Obviously, they struggled a little bit in the last little bit against Saskatchewan, allowing a late touchdown drive to Trevor Harris. But one thing I talked about in our breakdown was that if BC intercepts Trevor Harris in the end zone, it's a completely different game and you never know. So I have faith in the Lions. I think it's going to be a really hard-fought affair. I am going to go 31-29 Hamilton Ticats as my official SamCentre prediction. Moving on, we have the Toronto Argonauts taking on the Ottawa Redblacks. Both teams desperately needing a win, and the good part for them both is this is probably their best chance that they will have all season long when they take on each other Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. This is a game that I probably will not get to watch live, as I am on the Edmonton Elks event game day staff, and that's when I arrive to the stadium to start setting things up for our game at 2 p.m. Mountain, 4 p.m. Eastern, which we'll talk about next. Toronto Argonauts taking on the Ottawa Redblacks. This is a game where Toronto, in my head, is going to be the favorites. I haven't seen the lines, I haven't seen the betting movement, but what I would think in my head is Toronto can put up points. And I'm not sure Ottawa will this year. At least not with Jake Mayer as their QB. I think that guy sucks. I talk about it every time. I saw him play multiple times with Calgary last season live against my Edmonton Elks, and the guy's processing speed is not fast enough to be a CFL level starting quarterback in my opinion. Ottawa, you know who you need to start. He's sitting on the bench. Put him in. Toronto with Chad Kelly looked decent against Montreal in week 1. You know, there has been some turnover and Chad Kelly needed to get back to form, and he showed very little rust. He can sling it as well as any QB in the league. The guy has as much arm talent and arm strength as anybody we have seen in the past 10 years at quarterback in the CFL. His mobility is there. The guy is a good athlete. I'm just not entirely sure Toronto is set up with the roster to support him. That offensive line, leaky. Defensive line, leaky. Skilled position players, again, there's some of them on that team, but I'm not fully impressed. I think Ottawa has the better skilled position group. Especially if they can have Bell back at running back. That would make a big difference. I'll have to check in to see if he's playing before Saturday actually happens. We'll talk about it on our Friday show. But I would I'm going to say Toronto 28-24 will beat the Ottawa Redblacks at home, and simply because I'm not sure Ottawa has the offense to keep up with Toronto, and against a team like Ottawa, Toronto will be slinging it. 3 touchdown passes for Chad Kelly. Toronto wins the game. Montreal Alouettes taking on the Edmonton Elks. I've been saying it, and you're going to come back to the show on Monday, and I'm going to be right. I'm going to have my footage. I'm going to insert it right here, and it's going to be me celebrating on the sideline like this. And it's going to be the Edmonton Elks beating the Montreal Alouettes, giving Davis Alexander his first regular season CFL loss in his career. And again, I don't know if this is going to happen. This is what I want to happen. The weather forecast is looking really terrible. And I do think that means Edmonton has an advantage in one aspect of this game. We have the best ground game in the league. We have the best running back and a quarterback who really is good in Cody Fajardo at managing the game, managing the short to intermediate passes, and not turning the ball over in key spots when it matters. And a team like Montreal and Davis Alexander, I'd like to see if they can remain patient. They obviously have played in multiple different styles of games going back to last year, making it to the Grey Cup, winning close games, winning blowouts, winning games in the rain, winning games in multiple conditions. So my point here could be all moot, and Montreal could go out there by a score of 37-17 and spank us. But I don't see this happening. I think the weather is going to be a massive factor in this game. at least in the first half, it's going to pour rain here in Edmonton with the forecast. We're going to talk about it a little bit more Friday. We'll confirm who's in, who's out, what the weather's looking like. But when that's the case, the Elks are actually quite set up to play that type of game this year. They have a very good defensive line. They have a well-coached defense and special teams. And they have an offense that is designed to move the sticks and not really turn the ball over. We are designed as a team right now in the Edmonton Elks to not beat ourselves. And I think that's why you're going to see Edmonton finish in that middle of the pack this year, or undefeated. But most likely middle of the pack this year, winning some games like we saw against Ottawa, where a team in Ottawa cannot beat a game-managing team in Edmonton. And a team like Montreal might be able to. Davis Alexander is explosive. He's one of the best quarterbacks in our league for a reason. They have weapons all over the field. They have guys in their receiving core, in their ground game, on their defense who can make plays. They showed it against Toronto in blocking a punt. But if you struggle with the Argos, I wonder what's going to happen when you come into Edmonton and you come to our home opener and the weather's not great and we're punching you in the face a bunch of times with our ground game. Montreal has played 2 games. They're one of the only teams who has played 2 games. And so you start to factor in the fact that Edmonton's coming off a bye week. I'm serious about this one, guys. I think that this is the game the Elks win. This is a culture-shifting game for the Edmonton Elks. I don't want to be dramatic, but this is a massive, massive game for this organization. If they can change the tide and show everybody that after all these years, not only did we start 1-0, but we are 2-0 and we took down the team that just went to the Grey Cup and played a very tight game, for some of it at least, against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It would be incredible if we could be the team to show Davis Alexander his first loss. Again, it would be massive for the franchise. But being the Edmonton Elks, personally, you always have to know that we're still in a rebuilding phase for these sort of things, where Montreal is in a point where they are perpetual Grey Cup contenders. And so the game most likely ends 24-21 with Davis Alexander leading a late field goal drive to win the game. Montreal Alouettes being the official prediction. However, I'm not putting that on camera. 31-20 Edmonton Elks, and Davis Alexander takes home his first CFL regular season loss. That is the SamCentre official prediction of the week. Totally unbiased, by the way. Saskatchewan Roughriders will take on the Calgary Stampeders in our final game of the week. And this is one I should probably be able to catch at least the second half of. As our game will wrap up, I will stick around to clean up the field, and then I will head home. This game starts 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. This is probably game of the week when we talk about things in contention with BC at Hamilton, but potentially all 4 of these games, as we say every week in the CFL, have potential to be bangers. Saskatchewan, Calgary, Saskatchewan starting their season 1-0, defeating the BC Lions in their home opener ring ceremony. Trevor Harris led an incredible drive down at the end of the game to go and seal the victory against the BC Lions. He showed that he can put the ball wherever he needs to in tight windows, and he can hit his receivers in stride when he has to. The accuracy shown by Trevor Harris and the comfortability in his offensive system is on another level. And when you have, in contention for the best running back in the league in AJ Ouellette, and you have an offensive line and a defensive line, a coach, a special team staff, an organization that wants to invest in their players, Saskatchewan will never be an easy team to beat. And I really do feel like if they're locked in, if they're healthy, if they're ready to go, Calgary, you're in for a tough one on Saturday night. You already struggled with Winnipeg in a very winnable game for you, and Saskatchewan is one of those same teams who can hang in there to the very end and come back and win that game. Vernon Adams is an incredible playmaker, a guy who can scramble and create offense in plays that should not happen. But sometimes against some of these better defenses, that can be not great. You saw Vernon Adams in multiple years now be hurt because he holds the ball a little too long, and then all of a sudden something happens. And so if Calgary can play from ahead and they can control the ground game and they can do a lot of those sort of things, I think they're going to be in great shape here. But Saskatchewan, you cannot count them out. And we say this every single week. With a quarterback and a run game that can control the pace of the game, with a defense that can make plays, fly around, and make you pay for any mistake that you make, Calgary, you're going up against the defending champs. They look extremely locked in. I don't love your chances here. I am going to say this is our one blowout of the week. 34-20 for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They will win by 2 scores, and they will go in there and defeat the Calgary Stampeders. I do want to say this, though. You might see Vernon Adams go out there and be very upset that he let that game slip away against the against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because he went and led a drive at the end of that game thinking that he should have won it. So you might see him completely fired up, locked in. That place in Calgary could be very excited. I know they struggled a little bit in the second half with keeping people in attendance, but that happens in the CFL with the first couple games on a weekday. This is Saturday night in Calgary, McMahon Stadium, against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. You're going to see a sea of green against a sea of red. It's going to be extremely exciting. All 4 of our games this week are going to be worth watching, and we're going to break down a little bit farther on Friday the game between the BC Lions and the Hamilton Ticats. On Friday, we are also going to break down the upcoming UFC Apex card, Manel Kape versus Horiguchi 2, a rematch. Horiguchi being 36 years old, Manel Kape being 32. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. I believe there's 5 or 6 fights on that card I'd like to talk about as interesting matchups. Navajo Sterling in the co-main event. You know, he's been a prospect people have been hyping up for a while. They really like those New Zealanders over there. City Kickboxing, you know, he's been extremely well trained. So we'll get into it. I want to say this, guys. We're going to wrap up the show with my final message, Sentimental Sammy, for just a second. All of you coming back week after week, episode after episode to support me means the world to me. Leave a comment, like the video, hit subscribe, but ultimately, if you don't do any of those things, you watching is all that matters. This is my dream. We're going to make it happen. SamCentre out.